the online lecture recording of the current state of the hotel industry, part 1. We'll cover part 2 in class more specifically on issues with regards to the pipeline. First off, let's look at the global industry and where it's at. As you see, upward trend since 2009. Now, 2008-2009 was the dot bomb, or the downturn in the industry worldwide and the economic slowdown. But since then, what you see is a major recovery to the point where we're now well ahead of where we were back in 2008. So that bodes well for you and the industry as a whole as it continues to progress. I don't know if I had asked you which city in the world had the highest average rate, how many of you would have said Dubai? But in fact, Dubai in the Middle East is leader of the pack. Right behind, Paris, followed by New York, and then look at that, number 4 in the world, Singapore, leading Asia, Hong Kong right behind us. Well, what does that say? It says even though we may have an industry that's concerned about lower average rate year on year at the moment, we're still one of the leaders in the world in terms of where we're at. So the situation is good. Relatively maybe not as good as we would have liked it to have been, but it is good, and Singapore's situation and position in the world is quite good. Now, looking at global results, these back from April, but relatively the same if you make these kind of comparisons around the world. These are year-to-year figures on a year-to-date basis. So where do we stand? Look at Asia in terms of occupancy to begin with. You see that Asia as a whole leads the world in 2017 in terms of the overall occupancies. That's pretty positive. Moving over to the ADR, the average daily rate, well, you'll see that certainly North America and the Americas as a whole have run a higher average rate than Asia does, but in comparison, just take Southeast Asia, for example, which, by the way, occupancy-wise is above the average for the year-to-date through the period of April. We're at 115. If you look at the number, 115 is the ADR year-to-date in 2017, down slightly from the year before. But look at it compared to North America. North America is 124. That's not a bad comparison. You know, we're not in a bad situation comparatively there. Now, going down to the bottom, to the Middle East, you see a much higher average rate going on there, but not the same kind of occupancy as what we have here. So when that equates over to the REVPAR, again, you'll see similar kinds of comparisons. When you look at the percentage aspects of it, what you see is areas like Northern Africa growing at a much higher percentage than the rest in terms of occupancy, but average rate down significantly. So that's not a situation you want to be in. You don't want to be up 17% in occupancy and down 10% in ADR. Those are ones that you get concerned about. When you look at Southeast Asia, up in occupancy, very slightly down in terms of ADR, that's not a bad situation to be in. Now, ASEAN performance by itself. So where do we stand? Look at Singapore. Singapore year-to-date through April was at 81%, 81.7. Now, the only place that's above us in terms of the an actual locations would be Phuket and Hanoi. But if you look at the countries, we're the leader. Not a bad situation to be in, right? In terms of average rate, we're seeing very good average rates in Singapore, leading again significantly over the rest of the region, right? Very, very good situation to be in. Now, if you go over to the far right and you look at percentages, Bali is definitely one of the bright and shining stars, right? Occupancy is up, average rate is up, so REVPAR is up, it's up 10%. That's very good compared to Singapore being down essentially in those. So you might say, well, maybe we're happier in Bali than here, but then Bali runs a much lower average rate and occupancy of only 64.9 or 65%. So it's all relative. Yes, it's grown, but what did it grow from? You know, it's hard for Singapore to get big numbers because we're already running such high numbers overall. Now, certainly Hanoi is another place that things are positive. Vietnam as a whole is growing and growing rather well. So that's a good situation, good scenario. For those of you thinking of a hotel side and concentration, hotel careers, you know, an opportunity to work in a hotel in Vietnam is an exciting environment right now. Business is good. Now, comparing ASEAN cities, what you see here is the ADR in red, the REVPAR in green, and then the little blue dot is occupancy. Occupancy, Hong Kong leading the way. But where's Singapore in terms of average rate? The leader, right? Where's Singapore in terms of REVPAR? Above Hong Kong. So even though occupancy in Hong Kong may be a little better than it is right here, we're not in a bad scenario comparatively. You know, that's the key to look at this on a year-to-date basis through March of 2017, where we're at. Growth comparisons. Interesting, this goes back and puts right in the picture here exactly what I'm talking about. Singapore down in both ADR growth and occupancy growth. And that as a whole could be something compared to the region where you say, well, we're not doing as well as Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, right? They're doing extremely well with growth. But where is it relative to where we were? That's the key to look at this. Where is it relative to where we are? Certainly the business is strong in the Vietnam, better in Manila, better in KL. In Bangkok, maybe not so much on terms of the occupancy aspect, but the average daily rate is certainly strong. So let's look at the overall hotel industry in Singapore. First up, 33,000 employees. I'm going to come back to that in a minute and what's significant about that. 400 properties, 63,000 rooms. That's pretty impressive for a small place like Singapore, right? But keep that in mind, that 3,300 employees. This program that you got into, 3,250 applicants at one level of choice or another applied to this program in its first year. In its second year, 3,500. What does that say? About 10% of the industry is what the numbers were who have an interest in hospitality management level positions. So you may hear from the industry at times, we can't get enough people to wash dishes and peel potatoes and cut carrots and clean toilets. And that may be true, but we don't have any lack of interest from a management standpoint. But we have a very good group here at SIT Hospitality Business to fill those positions in a very competitive situation. So congratulations, pat yourself on the back. Let's look at Singapore, in terms of its comparison from REVPAR by type of property. See the luxury, upscale, mid-tier, and the economy. The red line through the center is overall. Again, in every one of the categories, what you're seeing is a slight downturn. Not very dramatic, but a slight downturn in 2014, 2015, 2016. Not anything significant, but a little bit down. But we went on a very fast growth aspect from 2009 forward. But if you look at the comparisons, the other thing you'll see is that the luxury market is still very strong. It still leads by a long way in terms of what we look at REVPAR-wise. The area where that has moved back into the overall aspect is the upscale, right? And overall, the economy has stayed very consistent over the years. That's what those numbers are trying to tell you. Now, looking at Singapore's comparison of occupancy, ADR, REVPAR, once again, you see that the lines are pretty consistent from like 2011 forward. Yes, we're slightly down over the last 2 years from where we were, but we're moving along at a fairly consistent basis. And when you look at the block, the ADR block, you see that the ADR has stayed very consistent in that process. There's been a little bit of difference in terms of the occupancies and a little bit in the REVPAR aspect as a result of that. But the average rate is staying fairly consistent throughout the whole period of time. That's a good thing for the future. It's a good thing for the future. But one of the challenges in the positives, if you will, of this is that we have a growth going on. And we'll talk more about that in the actual in-class lecture about what's being built in Singapore. And because you're seeing a lot of growth, the numbers compared year to year are actually more hotels entering the market. And we're still saying the same. And that's really where the bright side of the picture is. is that these are the overall aspects. We're still staying consistent even though we're adding properties into the mix. So our demand is staying strong. So in summary, we've looked at occupancies and ADR and REVPAR around the world. So we have a pretty good idea of where we stand here, and that looks pretty positive. And we get an understanding of the trends. Where is it growing the fastest? Where is it staying more consistent? And then we look at how Singapore stands in comparison. And once again, I can't emphasize this enough. We are in a good position overall. Now, there is room for growth. That's great. That's a great opportunity for us in Singapore, but we're still the leader in Asia and one of the leaders in the world. And I think that is a really positive aspect for us. Okay, thank you very much.